When for children's successful school education, we have a precursory factors to guarantee and assure children's successful school education. So number one is a cognitive foundations I just talked about. So it's like young age newborn babies to about 2 to 3 years beginning of life. They should make a solid sensory processing pathways, and then their attention as a cognitive function solidly developed, and then rest of school years, so they still develop perceptual process and conceptual process. So whole cognitive foundations, and then their social emotional cognition, and then their cognitive language. These are all together is the most important precursory factors for successful school education. And then their communication skills. It's not only about the linguistic communication, lingual communication, human language used communication. It is, cognitive language. This cognitive language and linguistic communication is very important because it is related to social communication. And then if children do not have a proper communication, do not develop proper linguistic communication skills and functions, and then pretty much when they start schooling or early childhood intervention, they have a functional communication training. So this functional communication is not directly related to human language related communication, human language founded communication. It's any kind of alternative method or augmentative communication method helps. So because its communication is really related to their safety and security. So life safety and life security, so they can make a proper communication, or pretty much they will make a behavioral communication. That means it's very challenging behaviors and adults have a hard time to understand in the beginning. And then once they get those behavioral communication, it became habitual communication, habitual behaviors, and then it is very hard to replace or remediate those behaviors. And then next one is a social cognition and people skills. So that is a part of precursory factors as well. And social cognition is a social senses and more like a social culture flexibility, it's cognitive flexibility. You can adjust a new culture, and then how sensibly you can just, aware about the new environment, new people. And then when you have a new grade level, new school year, and then you have changed the classroom members, and then you can adjust yourself, and then very just smartly you sense those, group peer dynamics, and you adjust and then behave, act based on that. And then people skill is very important skill set because humans are, all individuals are social animals and social creatures. So we are all social animals, human beings are all social animals. So these social cognition and people skills are very important. It is directly related to their social communication as well. So social communication and people skill are very, interrelated, interlinked abilities. It requires cognitive empathy and some empathy, empathetic mind, or compassionate mind, and all related. Also, pragmatic language is very important. Pragmatic language is like, social language and based on the culture. And it's not really directly just, dictionary meaning based communication. It is more like a cultural and human, just casual communication. So a lot of social part embedded in this pragmatic language. So social cognition and social sense or social standard and people skill are, one of the precursory factors. And then emotional cognition and how to kind of call the emotional intelligence it's not Howard Gardner, right? Emotional intelligence. It's a golden, and I suddenly just forgot the name. And that, emotional cognition is like emotional intelligence. That means how much is emotional maturity. So based on the circumstance, you control your own emotion. It's more like a self-control and self-regulation. So emotionally, you just become very smart and understand, even though you're just like tensed or just nervous. However, you just kind of, press down and tell yourself it's okay. I will survive today. It's a new year and everybody's nervous as well. And you just deal with and those new situation or very frustrated situation, challenging environment, and still, you don't show your genuine those emotional frustration. How will you just modify, control your own emotions? It's hard for even adults. However, we practice this emotional part, at schools as well. And then disability is yes, it is the very biggest big precursory factors for it's a really kind of weakness for school education success, right? However, children with disabilities are not all failed in school education. It's based on their disabilities and then based on the teachers, and they may have a functional communication and survive in school daily and make proper communication without showing those emotional communication or behavioral communication. And then disabilities could have, it's a disability itself is not that matter. Once if a child has a disabilities, and then they may have a weak communication, so they should have a functional communication. If they have a really linguistic communication, verbal communication weakness, and then there's weak social sense, they could have a weak social sense, and then they could have a cognitive flexibility difficulties. So it's very hard for them to switching, alternating their attention based on the circumstances. It's very, and then transition time, they may have a great difficulties. And pretty much disabilities and functional intelligence and potential intelligence, I would say disabilities have a high potential intelligence. So if we don't say when children have a disability labels, we don't say children have a really impairment. Impairment could be permanent conditions. However, disability is a consequence of the impairment. The child has impairment and then they could have a disability. And when children are born, I would say high potential intelligence than functional intelligence. Functional intelligence right now, it's about my smartness I can utilize right now. However, potential intelligence is underdeveloped. However, sleeping intelligence, that's how I see disabilities. 100% that if a teacher is smart and capable and efficient, and then we could develop this potential intelligence and gradually transform this potential intelligence to functional intelligence. So that is one of precursory factors. And then teacher quality, efficacy, and teacher capabilities are one of precursory factors for school success. So who children meet as a teacher, and then their future life could be different. And they met a good teacher, and that their future life is that very guaranteed. And they have weak teachers, even though their nature and home nurture is kind of okay, still they may fail in school education. So teachers really teacher efficacy, and then teaching communication, that is a teaching skills, how you communication is back and forth, expressive and receptive language, right? So when we say teaching communication and teacher make proper communication with the children, So when we make a proper communication, and then I, as a speaker, my receptive language, my listener understand my spoken language, right? And then my listener, my students say something, and then as a listener, I understand what my student said, my partner said. So this is a teaching communication between teacher and learner. Teaching communication between teacher and learner, how efficiently they could communicate. So teacher understand the learners' learning difficulties, or just what is good, what is not. And then learners understand the teacher's teaching. That's a teaching communication. And then teacher really needs empathy in a child. So teacher can walk into the child's internal world and see their frustration, desperation, and their difficulties and their feelings, their emotional states, and proactively they teach and manage and handle those issues so students can stay calm and continue their work. And then teachers a higher order thinking ability is very important, right? It's like an executive function is a part of this teacher higher order thinking. So how they run the classroom, how they manage student in the classroom. That student is a whole group students, however, still individualism you apply. So individual child, personalized characteristics, learning mode, learning, learning capabilities and learning characteristics, their personality traits, their other characteristics. So you consider all those and you provide education. So that's a teacher quality. And then home nurture is another big part, right? So home nurture is really, as I said before, home nurture and child nature, birth nature, and the home nurture combined together, pretty much we can foretell, this child, child can be a successful learner, or just like a kind of a little bit fragile learners, or they are weak learners, so we could tell, right? So when we talk about home nurture, it's like a poverty is a great part, how it is a kind of, many people believe children from poverty may not successful in school education. So if they have somehow those a little bit of potentials, because low-income families, parents are busy with just bread, earning and all other part, and then we have a dysfunctional families. It's regardless of their financial situation. So children home nurture is the children should have a solid social emotional foundation. However, this opposite poverty home issues, and then we have some okay and financially okay suburban areas of families. However, these parents still have a very focused on children's education, but their parenting styles may be hindrance of their school education. So it's like too protective parents, too permissive parents, too child-oriented parents, very inconsistent parents. So those parents raise children, and then those rearing children attitude could have different, children's background characteristics. And then last one is academic deficits, academic ability. So it's like a potential intelligence and functional intelligence. This academic part is the biggest one is for school education success or failure. When we say school education success is their academic success, and then social emotional maturity, right? However, school education failure is pretty much children's academic achievement is very low and critically low, and then we have a high incidence disabilities, high prevalence of high incidence disabilities, and then a lot of challenging behavior issues. So teachers suffer with children's disruptive off-task and very severe off-task behaviors and very challenging behaviors every day, and teachers feel suffocated and children just desperate in schools and lose interest and motivation in learning. So these are the academic and challenging behaviors interrelated, directly interrelated and correlated. So these 8 areas, and although each area has subcategories, but these cognitive foundation, communication skills, and social cognition and people skills, emotional cognition, disability, teacher quality, academic deficits, and home nurture conditions, these are all together we could say potential precursory factors for school education success or failure. Okay, so we have to work on this as teachers. We understand that these whole precursory factors, because children succeed, that means teachers succeed in school, in their profession and job, and children fail, that means the teacher fails. So teacher fails and then children fail, and teachers succeed and children succeed, and children fail and teacher fail. So very reciprocal relationships, interrelated relationships. There is no way teachers succeed and then children fail. It cannot happen. So very reciprocal, they are educational partners. So this means that they are educational partners. Okay.